Welcome to Tuesday night office hours. We are here with Lauren Sprieser today, and we're talking about training green horses. And I'm so excited for this one. I told Lauren before we started that I've been hiking, listening to her hack chats, and I find myself like literally thinking that I'm best friends with Lauren. And I hope someday that will be true. But for now, I have to reel it in and just make a formal request for Lauren to do more and more hack chats so I can keep hiking with my buddy. You likely know Lauren and know Lauren's background, but as a reminder, Lauren is a Grand Prix dressage rider. She has her USDF gold, silver, and bronze medals. She has trained 3 horses from the beginning, or 7. Sorry, 3 would be a huge accomplishment. 7 horses from the beginning of their careers to Grand Prix level, which I've never heard of anyone who's trained that many horses to Grand Prix level. So that's why Lauren is really the perfect person to speak with us tonight. And I'm really excited to learn from her. And the last thing I'll say is you likely see Lauren's name a lot on the Chronicle of the Horse. She writes for the Chronicle of the Horse a lot. So if you haven't already dug into all those articles, you should. There's a lot of wisdom there as well. But with that, Lauren, thank you so much for joining us tonight and taking an hour to teach us what you know.
My pleasure. Some of those 7 were not from the beginnings of their careers. I have to give some credit to the people who have started my horses because I don't start them, and also to the people who rode 1 or 2 of them as young horses because I didn't get them until they were a little older. But that can fall into what we're chatting about tonight, which is young horse training and the people who do it because they're amazing.
Totally. And just so you know, pretty much all of my introductions require someone to give a caveat. So one day I'll nail one, but that makes sense. And is, just as impressive. Really riding at the Grand Prix level blows my mind. So
mine too. Sometimes I'm like, what am I doing?
And how? It is mind-boggling. Before we dive into specifically the green horse training questions, Kinsey is going to chat with you and just help set the stage and give some context for where you are, what your program is, stuff like that.
We'll dive right in. Jessica kind of gave a preview there of the questions, but can you start by telling us where you're located right now and I guess year-round kind of where you ride out of?
So I'm in Wellington, Florida right now. I have amazing clients with a farm in Loxahatchee, just outside of Wellington, and home for me is Northern Virginia the rest of the year.
Nice. That is 2 amazing locations. I'm super jealous. So you are currently in Florida. How many horses do you have down there with you? And do you leave horses in Virginia when you go down to Florida? How does that look?
I was just doing the math in my head. I have 16 right now, but in a few days it's different. And then a few days after that, who knows? This is the first winter where I haven't kept my barn open in Virginia. We had a handful of clients who ended up dispersing to other places who will be making their way back when we go home in a couple of weeks. The anxiety of trying to run in 2 places is incredible. And I couldn't do it again. And this farm for us is new. Clients of mine win the award for best impulse purchase of the pandemic. They bought this farm. And hooray for them. And we love being here, and we're going to love being here for many, many years. Because it's hard to find like a long-term arrangement like the one I have now. So yay, thank you to the Broadbents for making this possible. But it also means that I have the consistency of being able to say, you know what, we're shutting the Virginia barn down and then coming down here.
Yeah, that really does seem like the move for your sanity, at least. But 16 horses, that is a lot. Are those all horses that you are competing? Is that what your main focus is right now, your own competition schedule?
Oh no, I love horses or I wouldn't do this, obviously, but I really love people and I love teaching people. So a handful of the horses are my own and my staff's horses. I have an amazing assistant trainer and a couple of working students. But I also have a full spectrum of amateur riders from the relatively low levels all the way through Grand Prix. And some of them are here to show, some of them are here training, some of them just don't want to do another Virginia winter. which are all fair answers. But we have this beautiful place, and the weather is normally very beautiful. It's raining right now, but we'll let it rain, for the third time in the last 3 months. I suppose that's okay.
Yeah, that is fine. Considering it's been like raining and like sleeting where I am in New York. So I would take that any day. So that reminds me, you just mentioned how many clients you have and how your focus is on the people that you work with. And another thing that Lauren is a huge expert in is running an equestrian business and doing so successfully. So we need to have you back on an office hours to talk about that as well. But for tonight, we're going to talk about training young horses because that's another area of expertise that you have. And you mentioned earlier, Jessa mentioned that you have had 7 horses that you brought up from various stages to the Grand Prix level. So when you add a horse to your program for you personally, a lot of times is that you getting a horse that's been recently backed, or what are you usually getting from a new horse? Like, is it super, super young, or how does that work?
My dream is 4. I really like 4. I'm not 22 anymore, and riding 3-year-olds can sometimes be amazing because, like, if they steer, you're like, oh, I'm a genius. It's amazing. And at 3, freshly backed, they're kind of like, oh, this seems fun. Like, you seem cool. But they just steer a little better at 4. You have a couple more tools, but it's also still before they hit the teenage, like, no, I don't want to. And so I like to have at least a few months of peace in the kingdom before I start saying, well, here's my leg and my hand at the same time. And they go, so then we're friends. If I get them at 5 or 6, caveat, if I can afford them at 5 or 6, it's either because they're behind, which sometimes is fine. But sometimes it's like meeting a 37-year-old boy who's living in his mother's basement and he's never had a job. And you're like, great, I'm here to teach you life skills. Like, there's a window that closes, usually not at 5 or 6, but it's a little more closed. And then I have to bang it open, and that's sort of exhausting. Or there's a problem. And I can take on problems, but I'm still not 22 anymore. And problems are getting a little tiresome. So I prefer to make my own problems. By starting with something in the general range of 3 or 4.
That makes sense. I mean, and when you're getting those 4-year-olds, how are you finding them? Like, how do you source your young horses? Do you have one person that you call and you trust them with everything, or how does that process work for you?
I have a lot of people that I call, both in the United States and overseas, and it's just a numbers game. You just end up calling a lot of breeders. You end up calling a lot of young horse starters. I call a couple of agents. I love agents, and I act as an agent myself on both sides of horse deals, and agents play a really important service. But for young horses, for baby horses, if you're trying to keep the cost down, the more agents and the more professionals you involve, the higher the price gets. And I'm a pro. We don't make any money. My God. So I have stepped back from having agents help me as much as I reasonably can. Certainly in the United States, I think that most breeders want to sell their horses as foals because foals love to kill themselves between being born and being an age of usefulness. So they want to get them onto somebody else's bankroll, which is totally reasonable. But I don't love buying foals and yearlings and 2-year-olds. So I'm generally looking for something that is either about ready to start or has already been started. Sometimes breeders have those. More often it's either Joe Blow random person who bought it as a foal and all of a sudden it's grown to be too big. That's my jam because I'm 5'10". So yes, if you have a really nice young horse that was supposed to be 16-1 and now it's 17-1, call me. Or maybe they've put it under saddle and it's just not what they want. Maybe it's too hot, or maybe it's too green. Maybe they thought that they were a good young horse rider and they are also not 22 anymore and they've lost some courage. So that's why it's for sale, or maybe they bought it to sell. All of those are perfectly reasonable reasons, but I'm looking for those people. Sometimes those are trainer friends of mine. Sometimes those are random strangers on the internet. Facebook is a blessing and a curse for sure. And it has its terrible qualities, but it also has its really good qualities. And it's a really good resource for finding any age of horse, whether it's babies or adults. There are certainly people that I don't call. There are breeders that I won't work with. There are trainers of young horses that I won't work with. And when it comes to buying from the United States, I'm a lot more willing to go with somebody that I don't know than I am going with somebody I don't at least have some connection to in Europe, because I don't speak the language. I don't speak Dutch at all. My German is fantastically bad. I don't, here in this country, I know that like Sally from Des Moines is a crooked bugger that I don't want to do business with, but I don't know if Hans or Franz in Dusseldorf are good guys or not. And so unless I have a personal connection to somebody in Europe, I'm probably going to stay away. Whereas in the US, I'm a little bit more trusting. It's a little easier to do my homework and figure out whether they're good people or not. And yeah, then you just spend a lot of time on the phone and in your people's inboxes looking at YouTube videos and seeing what they have.
Yep, that all makes a lot of sense. When let's say you had a 3 or a 4-year-old in front of you that came across your Facebook or wherever it came across, for you personally, sorry to go on a tangent, but I see these like glow ups of dressage horses from youngsters to Grand Prix dressage horses. And I'm like, never in a million years, one, would I even be able to tell you that's the same horse, but 2, could I have predicted that it could evolve that way? Definitely more so than looking at a young horse in other disciplines, maybe. So when you're looking at a 3 or 4-year-old or getting to ride it for the first time, what are the qualities that are telling you this might be one worth some time for you?
That's a great question. So let's start with what brings me to them when they're just a horse on the internet, because the reality is this is a huge country. I'm probably looking at horses on the internet because they're everywhere. Certainly Northern Virginia is a great place to look at young warm blood horses, but it's a big country and there's lots of breeders and trainers. So I'm looking at bloodlines for sure. Not that you can ride paperwork. You can't ride paperwork. But there are bloodlines that I've worked with that I don't like. There are certainly bloodlines that I've ridden that I do like them. So that's a good starting place. And then I'm certainly looking at bone structure and conformation, not because everything needs to look like it's a Devon in hand winner. In fact, I think if you go down the barn aisle or watch the trot up at CDIs, you'll see very little that looks like a Devon in hand winner and a whole lot that look like sickle hawked and ewe-necked and funny butts and whatever. And they have figured this level out through both horse and rider together's sheer force of will. I am a huge stickler for feet. They have to have at least good bone structure in the feet, and ideally a good exterior too. Although if you look at my current 5-year-old, who's like the great love of my life, her feet are heinous on the outside, and my farrier somewhere is like dying 1,000 deaths listening to me talk about this. And then they've got to move with their whole bodies. They do not have to move with their legs up to here. In fact, most of the ones who move with their legs up to here from God, I can't afford. And a lot of them don't stay sound. A lot of them, that big open movement doesn't close very well. And certainly dressage makes horses more beautiful. Dressage makes horses more beautiful. And so when you say, you've looked at some glow-ups of horses where you're like, where did that come from? Not half an hour ago, I got pictures. I have a 3-year-old that I bought as a foal, and I got pictures of her. She's just starting to come under saddle. And I was like, golly, it's going to be real pretty when its mane isn't this long and it's not fuzzy and it's not like all knees and elbows, because I have also seen her on the very beautiful days throughout her adolescence. And I've also seen her on the really ugly days of her adolescence. You kind of just have to have a little faith. But by 3, you're generally seeing at least the bone structure of where it's going to go. When it comes to actually interacting with them, I like a horse that goes forward, which has a lot to do with nature and a whole lot more to do with nurture. I also like a horse that takes me. I like a horse that wants to go to the bit and be like, bitches, we're off. And then there's an X factor. I have sat on hundreds of horses across all levels, breeds, types, and ages. And there is not to get like woo-woo Earth Mother on you, but there is a light that shines down from the heavens, and you can hear the angels sing when you're like, yeah, like this is right. Which when it's 3 and not under saddle, you're kind of just going, well, here we go. But there is still, there's sort of that look of eagles. You can look in their eye and have them be like, yeah, what's up? I've also had some really stunning failures that I felt really good about at 3. So let's not kid ourselves. The biggest factor is luck. It is luck. It is luck. It is luck. If you spend $10 million on the fanciest moving 3-year-old the world has ever seen that has x-rays of a god and feet like Adonis, and it steps in a hole, then you're shit out of luck. That's the way it goes. And the best horse of my life is in my barn right now. And he is a show jump bred, weird, totally strange dam line, not breeding anybody has ever heard of. And he's got this big ass and he's kind of shaped like a potato. And he has a heart the size of Montana, and we just get each other and it works. But I'm quite sure that I wouldn't have picked him out at 3. So.
I love listening to you. You're hilarious.
I need to interject because my Zoom just asked me if I was talking because I snorted when she said something. So I'm also so thoroughly entertained right now. And I told Lauren prior to starting this, I was a little bit frazzled, and I feel all better. So Lauren, thank you just for that.
You're welcome.
Job well done. So we already have a bunch of questions coming through, and I don't want to ignore them. So first question from Courtney, and she's asking, how do you start a completely blank slate? How much groundwork and lunging and long lining do you do before getting on?
Well, let me tell you how I do it. I call somebody else and I say, here's the horse. Let me know when it's broke. Full disclosure, if I can get the ride IQ good juju, I'm vetting an unbroke 3-year-old tomorrow. Let us. Yes, here we go. I want it. It's very pretty. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to go to my friend Dusty Craig in Upperville, Virginia, and I'm going to write him a check, and I'm going to say, call me when it's nice to ride. I bought a foal a couple of years ago. She is also 3. She is with my very good friend and student. It's weird to call a professional rider a student, but whatever. This guy I coach, whose name is Abe Pugh, and Abe is awesome, and I love him. And I also said, you hand me this back to ride when it's pleasant. If that's 3 months from now, fantastic. If that's 6 months from now, if it's a year from now, I'm going to be a little annoyed, but that's the ball game. I don't want to do the nonsense. So to answer the question, obviously, because I don't start them, I can't tell you like, well, I long line them X times. But I can tell you that lunging creates fitness. Lunging creates miles on legs. It also teaches horses about pressure, that you can close the back and the front at the same time. Particularly if you treat your side reins like training tools instead of like these decorative floppy objects. Long lining, same story. If you can close a horse, and I don't mean close like let you, stick your face in your chest and then I'm going to beat you and with the lunge whip until you pee off at 3. Like, no. But the reality is if they're going to be a dressage horse, they have to take the pressure. If they're going to be any horse, you avenger people, you also have to put pressure on your horses. Back to front, which means you have to have a front. And those are things that you can do from the ground long before you ever get on. Then you have to get on. And I started working with a horsemanship person a couple of years ago, which I had always thought was utter nonsense. And I'm now totally a convert, but it has to be a means to an end. Then you have to get on and you have to close your leg and you have to close your hand. Each horse is different, but they are not made of glass. And obviously I'm talking about warm blood horses here because that is all. Dressage is good for all breeds. Dressage is good for all types. I am not a horse racist, but if you want to do the high performance dressage thing, you're statistically speaking going to be on a warm blood horse. They're really slow growing. They're really slow maturing. They're not done growing until 6. But if you do not teach them how to go on the bit at 3, I promise it's going to haunt you for the rest of your life. And there is nothing more annoying than 11-year-olds who come to me having been with their sweet, well-intended owner from 3 years old, and they've never been told no, and they've never been on the damn bit. Like, exhausting. So use your groundwork tools, absolutely, but they're not just to wear your horse down before you hop on and then pray for the best. They are training. So train your horses.
So I'm interested in the work that you've done with a natural horsemanship coach. Is that work primarily for before you get on like and start working a horse under saddle? Is it for like respect purposes or ground manners purposes, or how are you using your natural horsemanship coach and training?
A little bit everywhere. I got into it because I bought a 6-year-old, which I could afford because he was the 37-year-old boy in the basement who'd never had a job. And so nobody had ever told him no before. And he was 17.3. And I'm a pretty brave rider, but he was a lot. And I had at the time a student who was a level 2 Pirelli, whatever the hell. And she said, Lauren, does he lead? And I was like, well, sure. Let me get my chain and my like elbow pads and like, here we go. And she was like, yeah, like, why don't you teach him how to lead like a civilized animal? And she put a rope halter on him and worked him. I mean, boring, basic stuff. We're not talking about like the height of Tick Maynard's wizardry. We're talking like whoa and go. And it was really quite revolutionary. So I started, and I have gone this far down the horsemanship path. I'm not an expert, but I started because I had this difficult bastard that I didn't know what to do with, that was really resistant to pressure. And I wasn't getting the places that I wanted to get under saddle. And I thought that the only way forward under saddle was to use force. And I didn't want to because I thought I was going to die. And also it's not nice, but definitely the death thing came first. And so it was a way to talk about pressure and about yielding and about submission in a way that I didn't care if he threw himself on the ground, which he didn't. But I wasn't up there. I didn't care. And it just sort of made me appreciate more how good basic groundwork is. And now it's a thing that I have done. I will say I mostly do it with when I'm having a problem that I can't easily dispatch using my dressage rider tools. But you bet I'll dismount and say like, hey, stop running through this rain, move away, very, very basic things. At home, I have this magnificent round pen. I have a 18-meter wide, 7-foot tall, all wood all the way around circle of good decisions. And when they're being little snots, you bet I will take them in there and I'll say, the world is gone. It's you and me, buddy. Like, here we go. And do some basic things. And it's let me be more effective. It's let me be quieter. It's let me do more with less, which is what dressage is all about anyway. And particularly since I'm not 22 anymore, it's given me a way to get a word in edgewise without like having to hike up my big girl pants quite as much.
Yeah, that is so cool. It's honestly something that I didn't know a lot about up until really recently. And hint, Rod IQ might be getting some content related to this. But we like listening to those lessons. It's just so unbelievably interesting. And I'm just like, after I listen to the lessons, I'm like, I want to go try this right now because it's so cool. I mean, just the way they communicate with the horses just seems very effective in a non-abrasive way, which I really like. Justin, do you want to say something?
I was going to say Kinsey cannot keep a secret for the life of her. Like literally every time, which I am the same way, but every time we have something coming up, I'll like look on Facebook and she'll be like, don't tell anyone, but here's the announcement. And I'm like, okay, well now these are the people that we were going to surprise. But it's still a surprise.
Well, if you're listening to this office hours, you deserve a little surprise.
Right.
So this is an interesting question, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I think this is Courtney is asking, so do you get on and immediately start working on contact? And she's responding to you saying you have to make them go on the bit at an early age. She said, my baby is backed and has trail miles on him, but I'm not sure when I should start taking out contact.
Yesterday.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yesterday. You should have started taking contact yesterday. And so let's talk about contact. I am not saying that you're going to all go out there to your 3 and 4 year olds and be like, well, Sprieser says this is it and be like, you got to look like Vallegro right now. No, but contact is for those of us that are older than 12, we know what a landline telephone is. When the line falls off of the post, the call goes dead. If you don't have contact, you don't have a way to communicate with your horse. And yes, we should ride our horses from back to front. Yes, leg and seat are to be used more than hand. Yes, 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 yes. But you want to talk about a way of riding a horse from back to nothingness in front? Thoroughbred racehorses. Are they on the bit? No, you got to have a front in order to ride your horse from back to front. And so, on the very young horse, it's a contact like I'm holding a child's hand to walk them across the street. I'm just here, but I'm here in a way that pushes the contact that I have down into the bottom jaw to teach them to yield at the pole. I'm not saying they have to be perfectly on the bit. I'm also, people of the internet, not going to lose my shit if they're behind the vertical for a moment, even for longer than a moment, because the sun is in fact going to rise in the east tomorrow if your horse is not in perfect balance all the time. So get out of my comment section, for the love of God. I'm preaching to the choir here, but whatever. It's how you get them to sing. Because if I introduce contact at 3, then it is not shocking when at 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, as you're starting to get serious about the upper level work, if I'm like, hey, I'm going to need you to take me a little more for collected canter, for half steps, for flying changes. Like if that's the first time you're telling them, it's not their native language. I want my horses to speak on the bit in an age-appropriate way and for an age-appropriate amount of time from day one. When my friends start my horses for me, when they start other horses for me, yeah, they spend the first couple of rides making sure that nobody's going to die. But you bet they are touching the damn reins. And pretty shortly after that, they're being asked to work in a round shape. And certainly on warm blood horses, it's easy because their ancestors went on the bit and their ancestors went on the bit and their ancestors went on the bit. But they still, it's not like they're all born having read the manual. You're going to have to teach them. And the sooner you can teach the basic concept, the less of a thing it is down the road.
Having a really green horse is tough, I would imagine, because this stuff isn't intuitive. Like, I think it would be easy to think like, maybe I should gradually start picking up the reins over a period of time. What are some, maybe like a couple other policies that you have that you make a habit of with your young horses so that their development is going in the correct direction?
Go like hell. Go. Go, 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 go. Even if you're running them out of balance a little bit, man, I would so much rather tell a 4-year-old whoa than go, because balky is super easy to create. And I'm not saying that like German auction riding is what we all should be emulating, but like, oh boy, those girls, they get in that oval and they're going like hell, which makes it harder for them to buck you off. When they're in front of the leg and they're really going, it is much harder for them to slam on the brakes and unload you. That is a safety thing. I have a 5-year-old who is like, she is my reward for tolerating these boys that have come before her. Like, she's such an angel. We should tell her whole story at some point because it's funny. But she just went to her first horse show. And I did the material class, which is a group under saddle class. Because she's 5, but she's very green. She's been under saddle about a year. She's also 17.3. She's huge. And like enduring a training level test, I was like, it's not going to work. And I'm not going to get a big mark. And I'm a princess and I only do it if I'm going to win. So I did the material class. And the judge very sweetly at the end was like, can you just humor me? And can you like slow her down a little bit and see if you can find like a little more cadence and a little more swing? Absolutely not. Going like hell. She's still in that age where I'm like, I'll think about and picking up your knees and hocks a little later. I'm still in the going like hell phase. And yeah, it does mean that at some point you're going to have to like half halt them back. But no, from the beginning, my 2 things, like if everybody taught their horses to go forward on the bit from the beginning, I would have to find a different job.
So how do you know, sorry, Kens, but I just wanted to jump in. How do you know you're going like hell to the right degree? So like, is it someone on the ground should be like man, they're cooking. Not like, oh wow, does she have control? Or like, how do you gauge it so you know you're going like hell the right amount?
Eyes on the ground, eyes on the ground, eyes on the ground. This is sort of my default answer to everything, is like everybody who's good at this has a coach. Nobody who is good at this is doing it alone. And certainly things like video are very helpful, but even doesn't even have to be crazy expertise. I have a very wonderful assistant trainer who is a USDF bronze medalist. She is not a big hotshit international Grand Prix rider. She's wonderful, but she is not the oh my god of Grand Prix riders, and she is extremely qualified to be like, why are you running? Or you need more bend, or what the hell are you doing with your right hand? It doesn't, you should get the best help that you can find and afford, of course, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an oh my god expert. Sometimes it's just somebody to help you calibrate your feel with the reality of the experience.
Yeah, I mean, that is tough because I feel like it's a fine line between going forward and just running.
But of the crimes that you could commit, running is an easier crime to solve.
Yeah, that's fair. It's probably easier to bring them back than it is to make them go forward later on. So the next question is, how does your training differ from the babies to older but still green horses?
That's a great question. Certainly there is the time that they work. In the beginning, it's sort of the I'm okay, you're okay phase. Like, the 4-year-old trotted and cantered, nobody died. Like, there is a trope that 3-year-olds should work 3 days a week, 4-year-olds should work 4 days a week, 5-year-olds should work 5 days a week, 6-year-olds 6, which is a perfectly reasonable place, and certainly I embrace that. Then we have to talk about what is work, because if I pull the 4-year-old out of the stall for day 3 of 4 and it looks at me like it's just melted, maybe work is standing on the mounting block and getting on and off 50 times and then walking 2 steps and hopping off and doing it again. Maybe work is going for a trail ride. We are big into hacking here at my house. For a DQ, we do a lot outside of the arena. Thank you very much. And so, my 3-year-olds to my 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, that is probably the biggest difference, is the amount that they're working, not only days per week, but also time. If my 3-year-old goes around the ring and doesn't eat anybody for 15 minutes, I'm done. They don't need to be fitter than that. There's nothing to win at 3, 4, and 5. There's only things to lose. So I'm smart about how much I work them. I think in general, I work them like 30 seconds longer than they want to work. And that's usually my stopping point. And then there's, your expectations of what is good. I tell my students that I don't sit on my 4-year-olds any differently than I sit on my Grand Prix horses. And I don't ask the questions that I ask my 4-year-olds really dramatically differently at 4 than I do as Grand Prix horses. I just ask 4-year-old questions. So I go from trot to canter on the babies, not really all that differently than I go from trot to canter on the Grand Prix horses. I just don't go from walk to pee off on my 4-year-olds. And I think that's very, very important, because I don't want to have to change the rules down the road. I want the rules to be the rules. There are things you're inevitably going to have to change your expectations of. Of course, I don't expect that my horses at 4 answer the questions, even the 4-year-old questions, like the Grand Prix horses do. Your track canter transitions on a 3-year-old, early 4-year-old are like, Jesus, take the wheel. But I still ask the same way, because I don't want them to be 6 and them to be like, just kidding, you thought you understood, but now I'm going to speak to you in Turkish. That's hard for them. Then they don't understand. And I my goal is to set them up at 3. At 3, I'm building my Grand Prix horse already. I'm doing it really slowly, but that's where it begins. It's not like, well, at 6, we're just going to pivot. It starts at 3.
It's so interesting because, like with the contact thing, I was already wondering about the seat thing. Like, are you riding with a lighter seat? But like, yeah, that's really interesting. So, I know it'll differ horse to horse, but what are the types of questions you're asking a 4-year-old? Is it just transitions in 20-meter circles, and then 5 years old? Like, how do you kind of progress through those questions?
I think that the 3-year-old works in one dimension. Basically, that is forward and back. The 4-year-old, you're starting to add in, the Y axis. You've got forward and back, and you've got a little left and a little right. Leg yields. In the canter, I'll do some shallow loops to start shifting their shoulders. By the way, I'm saying 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, like there's nothing magical that happens on their 5th birthday. So there's some wiggle room here. Like I said, I have this 5-year-old in my life that wasn't started until February of her 4-year-old year. She's also 17.3. Like, I'm not really feeling a burning hurry to put pressure on this creature. So caveat emptor, bear that in mind. Then in 5, I start saying, okay, now I want you to start thinking about bringing your weight back. At 5, I am introducing the very most basic ideas of collection in the canter. I am introducing, in my very, very slow way, the idea of piaffe. You will not see any 5 or 6-year-old, probably even 7-year-old in my life do a thing that looks anything like piaffe, but I'm going to start saying, like, come back here in the trot, get out. Okay, now I'm going to touch you with my stick, and it means pick up your leg from the ground. Like, these are things that I introduce at 5 and into 6, because then it's like, woohoo, it's a game, instead of like, well, it's time for you to learn. It's time on the schedule. Because then I can take 4 years to do it. I can take 5 years to do it. What's the hurry? At 6, I am generally introducing a flying change. And at 7, I'm starting to get a little more serious about, like, okay, piaffe isn't just like a fun, happy game anymore. It's like a place that we actually go to visit. I have never made a Grand Prix horse younger than 9. I know there are people out there who do it, and I don't know how. I'm not as good at it as they are, I guess, which I'm fine with. But that's kind of where I'm going with the kids. There's a whole lot that can be done with right and left adjustments to start thinking them about up and down adjustments. And my grand unified theory of horse training is always, whatever they want to do, don't do that. So when I have a horse that's like, I'm a wizard at collection, well, then we're going to gallop on a little bit and think about a little bit bigger and a little bit more open. For the ones that really want to be big and open, which is more normally the case at 3, 4, and 5, I'm thinking about ways to use exercises to make them small. Not pulling, but like, I'm going to introduce some smaller circles judiciously. I'm going to introduce some sort of rapid fire transitions judiciously. I'm going to use something that the Spanish riding school guys and the Portuguese school calls the school trot. It's not piaffe. It's not more collected. It's just smaller. And it's this idea of kind of rocking them back and sending them forward and rocking them back and sending them forward in a way where they can't change their neck and they can't change their posture. So they get the idea of, like, I'm not going to weaponize power as an excuse to, like, bear down against the bit. That's, if I'm introducing that at 4 and 5, then when I say, okay, piaffe de passage at 9, 10, 11, it comes from that place. But I've lost the plot a little bit.
No, that's so interesting. You outlined it perfectly. And that was a question I was going to ask, is basically the question you just answered is, at what age are you introducing the different movements? When do you start, like, actively competing your horses or getting them super acquainted with the dressage ring? Because you just mentioned that you, like, don't like to go if you're not going to win. How do you approach that?
There's no way to answer this question without sounding like a pompous dick. So, like, let's just go there. I have my bronze medal. I don't need any more scores at 1st and 2nd level. Thank you very much. So I take them out as 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, whenever I get them. I take them out to enough horse shows to make sure that I'm not going to die when I take them to a horse show. If I think that they're going to win stuff, then, like, sure, we'll go to the regional championships. Why not? Goals are nice. Goals keep you inspired. And if I don't own them, then you bet I'm going to go do some stuff, because everybody likes ribbons. But I just, if I never do another 2nd level test again, I will dance the tarantella. Third level is when I start competitively giving a damn. So that is generally, you'll see my stuff at training and first levels, and then they'll kind of disappear for a while and they'll come back out at third. If they're schmucks and they're naughty at horse shows, and they're going to keep going until they aren't naughty anymore. But generally that they get sorted out. I ride a lot of weirdos, but eventually I am more stubborn than they are, and they figure it out. And then I'll take them out again at Prix St. George, and then I'll take them out again at Grand Prix. And that's sort of my general trajectory.
So a question that I have, because we talked about what you look for in a 3 and 4 year old and how you kind of develop them. The norm in Kinsey and I's limited circle, and I know the norm varies based on the community you're in and the geography you're in, really, but the norm in the community that we grew up riding in was for amateurs to get, the people who were getting young horses were getting 5 or 6 year olds. And those 5 and 6 year olds had bad habits already. If an amateur is looking for a 5 and 6 year old, maybe one of your students who's not wanting to go Grand Prix, but's wanting to be successful, what are the habits that you'd be like, nope, we're not taking it? Like, is it dead to the leg, hanging on the hand? And then what are habits that you're like, it's fine, we can fix that?
You know, it's certainly there's no crystal ball, there's no magic wand, but if they don't go when I put my leg on, it's going to be an uphill climb. And there is a horse for every life stage. I have folks in my life who are learning to ride as adults, or who are learning about dressage as adults. There is a difference between being behind the leg because they're a little bit lazy, which for these types of students, fabulous. Like, I want something that I'm going to have to like in order to make it go, because then they're going to put that limited amount of self-motivation into bucking off my amateur student. Then there is when I put my leg on, it doesn't go because it's going, I don't wanna. That's my hard no. I got on one the other day that I asked it to trot and it started bucking, and I was like, no, you are not trained. Thank you very much. And there, you bet there is nature and nurture to that there are ones that want to be sulky from God, and then there are ones that want to be sulky because nobody's ever told them not to. But I find in general that like the thing they do when they're 3, the thing they do when they're 4 is the thing they're going to do when they're 8 and 9. And balky is my personal, like, I hate it. Strong doesn't bother me because at least they're taking you. Bucking is like less enchanting, but you know, you can gallop them forward through that. It's hard. It's hard looking for me, much less looking for somebody who doesn't have big balls because they do this for fun. It is theoretically supposed to be fun. But I think that one thing that I like to do is I like to be, this is going to sound terrible, but I like to be like this much mean. I like to flop around in the saddle. I like to kick a little too hard. I like to stop them suddenly. And if they're like, well, shit, sorry, like, did you need something? Did I blow it? Like, are you okay? Are you having some sort of fit up there? That's fine. The ones that are like, I can't believe you touched me, you ass. Like, those I don't like. I like the ones that are game to take a joke from nature. Yeah, and then when I have clients looking for young horses that don't want to start at 3 and 4 and they are looking at 5 or 6, man, I want to know the circumstances of why it's for sale at 5 or 6. And I'm not saying there aren't things that are totally wonderful horses out there that are bought at 5 and 6 that are on the market because the person's getting divorced, or because they're having a baby, or because it got too tall. Love those. Or because it never got tall enough. Not so much for me, but for other people. Those are all totally good reasons. But man, a lot of them at 5 and 6 are for sale because they're nappy. And because those are the tough years. Let's be clear, for all of you who are suffering through the 5 and 6 year old years on something that's being a little shit, it's probably being a little shit because it's 5 or 6, not because of anything you did. I have had horses that have the conformation of a god, that were started magnificently, that have never had one hair point the wrong direction on their body. And at some point at 5, they go, you in what army? And it's time for me to be like, me in this army, sir. Because that's the time. It's like teenagers, they can't help it. So I absolve you, my children, of your guilt. But those are the hard years. And if you're going to walk into one of those halfway through those hard years, like, I want to know what happened in the first half. And if they're too quiet at 5 or 6, they're probably not going up the levels. There's my other. They exist. I have some in my barn that at 5 were good, and at 12 are good, and at 15 are still good, but they are the exception, not the rule.
Yeah. So this next question is great, as all the questions are, but this one is, as a trainer, would you be annoyed with a student of yours bringing their young horse for a lesson on the basics? Of course, this is related to me and my baby. LOL. I have a super trainer, but feel like I would waste her time bringing my guy to her to work on basically telling me very basic things that I know how to do, but I really want eyes on the ground just to solidify that when I'm asking him to take the pressure, bend, etc., that I'm doing it fairly and correctly. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And let us be clear on a couple of things. I make CDI quality team level international Grand Prix horses, and we work on the basics. It's all basics. It is all basics. Second, to anybody whose trainer says, I won't work with you until those horses farther along, fire them immediately. That is super not cool. Of course, bring us your young horses. Of course, bring us your green stuff. Let's build the solid foundation together. That's how you get a nice house. If the foundation's cracked, where do you go from there? You're going to end up having to go back and fill in stuff. No, please, 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 please work with your awesome trainers with your young horses. It will bring you joy down the road, I promise.
Then you got your eyes on the ground too. Let's talk about equipment you use on the green horses. Are they all going in the same type of bit? Are they, I mean, I'm sure they're in a dressage saddle right off the bat. You mentioned like equipment that you might use in terms of side reins, things like that. What's your approach there?
There is an element of course, I want them all to feel comfortable, and I want them all to, go in the gear that's going to make them go their best. However, there's an element of building a better mousetrap, and there are a lot of people out there who make bits, and a lot of people out there who make spurs, and a lot of people out there who make side reins that want to sell you stuff. So my young horses, first of all, you don't get your own gear until you're worth me putting money into your own gear, unless you're a really weird size. But I generally don't have those. I have a bit box with like 5 different bits in it. There's like the egg butt one, the loose ring one, the one with the mouthpiece that's a little funny, the one with the titanium one, and then like that's pretty much it. Okay, 4. There's 4. You get your choice of a crank noseband with a flash, or crank noseband without a flash, or a drop noseband. That's it. By the way, for anybody who's going to at me later, crank nosebands, the padding is better, and the buckles aren't generally on the jaw, so settle down. You don't need a freaking Micklem. Sorry, William Micklem. Like, you don't need the special magical pole thing that goes 6 inches behind the horse's pole to alleviate the nerve of the whatever. Like, put your horse in normal stuff and then close your leg and close your hand at the same time. The horses in my life have to go to public school, and they have to take geometry, even if they don't like geometry. And then they can go to like the cool liberal arts college or the Montessori program. When you start them in the Montessori program, then there's too many exceptions. There's too many, well, Fluffy doesn't like it. No, Fluffy doesn't like being told what to do. Let's knock that off. I own side reins, the normal kind with the donut. I don't like anything too elasticy because sometimes that can teach them how to do weird things, but like side reins, or I have a set of Vienna reins or triangle reins or sliding side reins or sliding draw reins, whatever you want to call them, the kind that go from the girth like a Y up through the bit and then back to the saddle. The horses that want to hide behind the bit a little bit, I put in side reins. The ones that want to rip my arms out, I put in the sliding side reins because you can't pull on those, kids. And then horses that want to pick their heads up go in the sliding side reins. Horses that want to put their heads down go in the regular side reins. I also don't lunge a ton. I just don't. So I am certainly willing to have my eyes opened on other uses for side reins, but that's kind of where I go. I do make sure that the saddles fit well, which is really hard to do with young horses. And I have nothing but sympathy for people who have one young horse that they keep at home, because in my barn with 20 horses in training at any particular time, we've got 6 or 7 different makes or models of saddle in different sizes. So when, Fluffy outgrows his saddle, then I can borrow Dobbins for a little while until Fluffy decides what shape he wants to be for longer than 6 months. And that's a really convenient thing to have, but it is imperative that your saddle fits really well. And if you're going to screw up on the side of wide, because you can always add padding. Because when a saddle is too narrow, this is like my soapbox. I am this amateur saddle fitter. When the saddle is too narrow, how is a horse supposed to know that narrowness that pushes down on the part of his back that is supposed to be lifting up isn't an aid pushing his back down? Like, how is he supposed to distinguish between, my saddle fits like garbage, and the bit in his mouth telling him to push his mouth down? So saddle fit, that I will actually put time and energy into for the young horses. But yeah, bits and bridles. Sorry, kids, you don't get to be weird. You don't get to be special until you actually are special.
I think it's fair. That is a very good policy. So we've got some questions that are a little bit unrelated to training young horses, but we have some time. So I figured we can answer them, get your perspective. How important do you think it is to learn the letters of the ring?
I am a serious high-level international dressage rider, and with a gun to my head, I could not tell you the letters of the ring. I could tell you the centerline letters. My friend Liz Austin says, "Don't look, X is gone." DLXIG. The rest, I have no idea.
That's fair. Well, good to know. You heard it here first. The next question is, how important is it to learn the training scale? Should my trainer be constantly referring to it? Because none of them have ever mentioned it ever.
Please, Lord, let Lendon Gray not be on this. The training scale is a really good starting point. It is important. It is valuable. I have a poster of it in one corner of my arena, and that's pretty much the extent of my daily usage of the training scale. Certainly as an experienced trainer and an experienced rider, like, I know the training scale and it's in the very back of my mind. But I think that it sort of manifests in, okay, I'm looking at the horse and rider in front of me. What's important? I don't have to think like, well, the training scale says that it's rhythm and relaxation. Like, I'm like, is it going forward? Like, is it on the bit? Is the lady flopping like a trout, or is she sitting still? Like, yeah, the training scale is certainly a really good device for people who think that way, but it is one of many tools in the toolbox. And if you just put up a poster in the corner of your arena, then you're officially absolved of any further responsibility to the training scale. No, don't do that.
There you go. That's exactly what she wanted to hear, I'm sure.
There you go. You're welcome.
How much does reading a book about dressage help? And I guess, do you consistently read books about dressage?
Everybody's got their own learning styles. I just wrote something about this, and now I'm going to forget. There are 5. There's people who learn by reading, people who learn by writing, people who learn by listening, and people who learn by doing. There's 4 people who learn by doing. And it's not like we all fit into one. Like, all of us can learn things all ways. But there are people out there for whom reading is really valuable. I'm not one of them. I am really good at listening. I'm very, very good at writing. And learning that way. Like, if I write about something, I know it. And at the end of the day, for me personally, I'm an athlete. I have to get on and do it. Some people love listening to clinics and watching clinics. That's how they learn. Fantastic. Do that. If books works for you, rock on, do it. It doesn't personally work all that well for me. And I would love to tell you that I'm a good person who goes home and studies my craft, but nope. When I leave the barn, I leave the barn. I am reading fantasy smut right now, and I don't care.
As you should be, though. Like, that is healthy. That is how it should be. Kyle, with regard to the training scale, Kyle, are you allowed to say that and not be shunned in the dressage world? And Kyle, she's allowed to say whatever she wants. But He can't talk. The next question is, I recently heard that the thing with dressage is to understand how to feel the back two legs. I never feel those legs. Best I can do is hear them. Is there anything I can do, ride bareback maybe, that would help?
Close your eyes. Close your eyes while you're riding. Don't do it in a crowded arena. Maybe don't do it in an open field with obstacles. But I have my students close their eyes all the time, and this is not just a horse thing. Like when you lose one sense, your other senses become more aware. So if I'm like, as I'm sitting here, I have an increased awareness of the fact that I'm sitting to the left right now. So I'm going to just like sit a little more to the right. And I can do that because taking my sight away made me a little bit more kinesthetically aware. When I have students learning how to pick up the canter from the walk, I will often have them close their eyes and try and tell me when the inside front leg is coming forward, which they can or cannot do with their eyes open, but man, they can all do it with their eyes closed because that is the moment when you ask. So yeah, pro tip, close your eyes.
That's awesome. That might be the best tip that we got here tonight. I love that. So we're here almost on the hour, and I wanted to ask you one more question. Jessa might have a question for you as well. But I've heard about other top dressage riders, and one in particular, when he rewards his horses, he just lets them gallop, and it's just like, have fun, and that's his reward. Do you have a go-to reward that you do for your horses when they perform particularly well?
Anyone who's ridden with me will tell you that I hate it when people use their voice indiscriminately. Because it's a really bad habit and it will make an appearance in your dressage test. I promise, if you're a clucker, like you are going to cluck in the ring and you're going to do it at sea and you're going to embarrass me. So please don't do it. With that said, I am a good boy. I will sing to them from the rooftops because I want them to feel like King Kong on cocaine when they're good. You then just have to be mindful that you can't do it in a show ring. So I usually accompany that with a stroke from the reins. I'm not like a big crazy patter. Sometimes I am, but I want something little and subtle where they know they've done a good job that I can do in the arena, and not get in trouble. And the best reward you can give your horse ever is getting off. When I'm teaching something really hard, like the ones, when they get them, I will stop and dismount, because what bigger reward is that?
I'm learning so much. I love office hours, and I love this office hours. I think the question that I would love to end with is, what is your favorite part of your job?
Oh my God.
Your mare.
It's high on the list right now. Can I briefly tell the story of how this mare came to my
Yes, please do.
I was a little drunk, and I was on Instagram, and this horse appears in my Instagram feed with a dealer in Holland that I know. And I did not need another horse. I could not afford another horse. And so with vodka in my system, I said, "Hey, Rom Vermont, how much is this mare?" Expecting it to be a very, very big number. And he came back with a number that was remarkably not terrible. And then he sent me a video of her reaching over her Dutch door with her head and licking a dog. And that is Maddie. If you listen to some of my Ride IQ lessons, Maddie makes an appearance. But yes, I bought Maddie drunk on Instagram because she licked a dog.
Oh my gosh, that is the best story that I've ever heard. And I was wondering if that was the horse from your lessons, but you've mentioned, I knew that you ride a 17-3 horse in some of your lessons, but you've mentioned 2 now. So I was like,
2. Yeah. And the 3-year-olds, by the way, the one that I own already is like 17-1 at 3. And the one that I'm vetting tomorrow is also the same height. So yay. But to answer your question, what is my favorite part of my job? I play the long game. I don't do anything fast, and I'm not in this for the short-term gains. Watching humans or horses that I have made really find their way to any level, but man, like watching them do their first Grand Prix, watching them do their first Prix St. George. Like I have a little chill at my back just thinking. I have this big, complicated 17 3-hand older horse who he was a very difficult child, and he's gotten normal and he's fun to ride. His name is Puck. He's also in some of my lessons. Puck's going to do his first inner two in a couple of weeks if I don't throw up. Guys, that's going to be so amazing because it was a monster. It was a rogue, and I've made it normal. I made it better. I made him more beautiful. My students who go down center line at the Grand Prix level, look what we did together. That's what gets me out of bed on the days when I don't want to get out of bed. And there have been those days. That's what keeps me coming back.
That's amazing.
Well, I have those chills too now. It is wild. Lauren, we just love you so much. You are amazing. And I'm speaking for me and Kinsey, but I'm definitely speaking for everyone at Ride IQ too. And I know when we first got introduced to you, I was like, please let her say that she's willing to do this, because we know how busy you are and that it's not easy to add something to your schedule. But literally since day one, since pre-day one, that first conversation we had, but also day one with Ride IQ, you just bring the brightest light, the best energy, you put your best foot forward, and we get to learn about your amazing horses, which I'm falling in love with all of them. So this was a blast. We learned so much. I hope we can do more of these, but really just know how much we appreciate you, know how much I love listening to your hack chats, and I know I'm not alone. And thank you again for taking the time tonight.
You're very welcome. I'm delighted to have met all of you, and I'm delighted to be part of the family.
Thanks so much, Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Bye, everyone.